Chapter 5. The Ceremony. The wedding day arrived, like all the worst days do. Bright and cold, deceptively clean, the sky over Castle Voss a pale gold that made everything look like it had been set to music. I put on the dress. I let them do my hair, the handmaidens, 3 of them this time, working in silence that felt heavy with things unsaid. The winter forest woman braided pearls into my dark hair. Another dusted something shimmering along my collarbones. The third stood by the door and watched the corridor. The blade was strapped to my inner thigh, flat against my skin, cold through the thin fabric. I had sewn a small loop into the lining of the dress the night before, just in case, just so it would be reachable if I needed it to be. I told myself, I am still the mission. I am still Seraphine Ashvale of the Order. I will do what I came here to do. I told myself this all the way down the 3 flights of stairs, through the long corridor lined with his court, all of them in black and deep burgundy, standing in rows, watching me pass with expressions ranging from cold assessment to something approaching wonder. I told myself this as I entered the great hall, with its ceiling so high the blue-black flames along the walls barely reached it, with its floor of dark polished stone, reflecting everything back at me doubled and distorted. And then I saw him at the far end of the hall. He was standing perfectly still. No movement at all. The way only a creature with centuries of stillness behind it can stand. And he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on any face before, human or otherwise. He looked like a man who had waited a very long time for something and had stopped believing it would come. I walked toward him. The traditional nocturne wedding ceremony is not like any wedding I had ever imagined or read about. There are no flowers, no music in the conventional sense, only a low, resonant vocal cord held by 6 members of the court, the sound that hummed through the castle walls, now coming from living throats. The officiant was Calindra, which surprised me. I had not known she held that role. She stood between us in her dark braids and her quietly clinking jewelry, and she looked at me with those steady, knowing eyes as Aldric and I faced each other. Up close, with nothing between us except the formal space of ceremony, he was even more— I don't have a better word than that. Just more. More present, more still, more real than almost anything I had ever been near. He reached out and took both of my hands. His hands were cool, not cold, not the dead cold of what I had been told to expect, not the cold of a body with no warmth in it. Cool like a stone in shade, like river water, like the inside of a cave where something good is preserved. I felt him notice me noticing. Calindra began the words of the ceremony, old words, old language, and beneath them she translated softly in the common tongue for the human members of the court. A joining of selves, a binding of houses, an offer freely given and freely received. Freely. The word hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. When it came to my part, my vow, I had memorized the words, 6 weeks of preparation. I knew them the way I knew my blade drills, automatic and deep buried. But standing there with his cool hands around mine, with those amber eyes on me, with Calindra watching us both with that expression of ancient, careful hope, I said the vow.
All of it. Every word. And somewhere in the middle of saying it, it stopped being performance. I don't know exactly when, I can't point to the sentence, but I felt it happen, a shift, like a door unlocking inside my chest that I hadn't known was locked. My voice didn't waver, my face didn't change, but inside me, something that had been rigid for 11 years bent, just slightly,
toward the warmth coming from his hands. When the ceremony ended, when Calindra spoke the words that sealed it, and the cord from the court swelled and then fell into silence, Aldric leaned close. Not to kiss me, that was not the nocturne tradition. Just close enough to speak quietly, privately, in the hush of the hall. He said, "Whatever you came here to do, you do not have to decide today. Take the time you need." I stared at him. He met my eyes and held them. "I chose this," he said. "Whatever it means. I chose it." Then he stepped back and turned to his court, and the celebration began, and I stood in the middle of the great hall in my cream and black gown, with his mother's silver chains on my wrists, and the blade strapped to my thigh, and the most confusing feeling I had ever had rolling through my chest like a tide. He knew. He had always known. And he said yes anyway. Why? I needed to understand why. Chapter 6. What the Blade Costs. 3 days into our marriage, I received a message from my mother. It was coded, of course, sewn into the lining of a package of personal items sent from a family friend in Talvek. I found it while unpacking, slipped between the pages of a book of poetry. In the orders cipher, "Mission overdue. Report status. Do not let sentiment compromise the objective. Thousands depend on this. Remember who you are." I sat with that message for a long time. Remember who you are. The problem was, I was beginning to wonder if who I was had ever been entirely true. Life in the castle had a rhythm I had not expected. Not the suffocating watch of a prison, but something stranger and more unsettling. Ordinary days, meals, conversations, the business of running a court and a kingdom, which turned out to be relentless and specific, and not unlike managing a very large, very complicated household where many of the staff had strong opinions and centuries of experience. Aldric worked constantly. That was the first thing I truly noticed about him. Not as an observation for the mission, but as a real, involuntary recognition. He was in his study by dawn, and often still there past midnight, reviewing correspondence from the territories, meeting with advisors, managing disputes between regional lords with the careful patience of someone who has learned that speed creates more problems than it solves. He was not the ruler of terror I had imagined. He was the administrator of a civilization. One morning, I asked Oswald, the thin court advisor who had informed me of my selection, what the king had done the previous century before the current formal court structure existed. Oswald looked at me with his knife-cut mouth. Then, carefully, he ended the blood tithe. I knew about the blood tithe. Every hunter in the Ashvale order knew about it. The practice that Aldric's grandfather Corvus had instituted, the monthly taking of blood from human towns, enforced by nocturne soldiers and responsible for hundreds of deaths over decades. He ended it? I said. 43 years ago, against significant opposition from the old court. 3 of his generals attempted a coup. He handled it. Oswald paused. The territories have been under formal protection law ever since. Unauthorized feeding is punishable by banishment, or, in severe cases, death. Another pause. The order your family belongs to does not acknowledge this. They prefer the older story. He walked away before I could respond. I went to the library and I found the records. Actual records, not the order's version. It took me the better part of 2 days to read through enough of them to understand the shape of it. The blood tithe abolition, the protection laws, the 3 coup attempts Aldric had survived, each one trying to pull the court back toward Corvus's methods. He had not just ruled, he had reformed. Slowly, carefully, against powerful opposition, over decades, he had changed what his court was. I thought about the names carved into the Ashvale compound wall. the hunters the nocturne court had taken. Then I thought about the dates on those records. Most of the losses on that wall, most of the names, came from before the blood tithe ended, before Aldric's reforms, before the protection laws. One name was more recent, Mirette, my cousin, gone 4 years ago. I went to Aldric that evening. He was in his study, candlelight low, documents spread across the desk. He looked up when I came in, said nothing. He had learned that I sometimes needed to gather myself before I spoke. "My cousin," I said. "Her name was Mirette. She disappeared 4 years ago. She was sent north. Did your court take her?" Something moved across his face, something careful and heavy. "I know that name," he said. He set down his pen. "Mirette Ashvale. She was captured by 2 of my former generals, before I had them removed for violating the protection laws. She was held for 8 days. When I found out, I had her released and escorted south." He paused. "I sent a communication through back channels to the order. They did not acknowledge it." The air in the room felt very thin. "She never came home," I said. "I know." His voice was quiet. "I looked into it after. She was intercepted on the road south, by hunters who believed she had been turned and compromised. They..." He stopped. "They killed her," I said. "Yes." The silence that followed was enormous. My cousin Mirette, gone 4 years. The order had told us the vampires took her. The order had carved her name into that wall of grief. And the truth was so much worse and more complicated than any monster story. I left his study without another word. I went to my room and I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, and I held the blade in both hands and I tried to cry, but the grief was too large and too strange for tears.